Penn State's season ends in the Orange Bowl after a loss to Notre Dame in the college football playoff semifinals. We break down the season-ending loss, look at Franklin's struggles against the top teams, and discuss what the future looks like. Nittany Nation Overtime is next.
I'm doing it. Hey, getting right to it. Yeah, the money is talking, I'm flowing, it's coming in just how I do it. Yeah, you know what it is. Hey, we doing it big. Look up, there is no limit, no, we cannot settle for this. Yeah, can't stop, nah, won't stop. Yeah, it's been on live. You don't believe it, just watch.
Welcome into another edition of Nittany Nation Overtime. I'm your host, Ryan Risky. I'm joined by the Nit Wits, Mark Brennan, Rudel, and former Nittany Lion Keith, Goon, Conlin. Guys, it was a great season. Penn State fought to the very end and came up just a little short.
Yeah, that's the way to put it, Ryan. It was a memorable run in the first 12-team college football playoff, but unfortunately, it's the same ending. It's the same ending in the biggest moments, and just kind of a regrettable finish against a team that was beatable. And I think Penn State was right there, and that's what they're going to have to overcome somehow going forward, whether it's Ohio State or Oregon this year or the Notre Dame game. The best three teams they played, they found a way to lose.
Yeah, I think we're here a couple days after the fact, and you have to look at it in two different ways. One big picture, the entire season, Penn State has an awful lot to be proud of. If you're a Penn State fan, this team kind of got back to where it had been. You're in the Final Four. That is elite. That's the elite level. But on the macro level, as Neil said, you get in there against these other elite teams and the same thing is happening. Not the exact same thing, but key mistakes down the stretch. You had 4 key errors in the fourth quarter, the last 8 minutes when you're up. The last one, an unexcusable interception by a veteran, and you lose the game. So a lot to hang your hat on, but also a lot of people are saying, what if?
Sure. I mean, we've been begging for this playoff since 1968, I believe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, there's no doubt about it. But how it ended, obviously, is frustrating. But the fact that it was there, we were part of it, was amazing. And, the fanfare that went into all the games. When all the games were fantastic, I think the playoff games have been great in itself. But again, in the end, it is frustrating, but you have to look back upon the whole season and say, you know what, are we better this year than we were last year? And I do believe we are.
One thing I would say to Neil's point, I mean, the way that Penn State played, like you looked at these playoffs overall, and I don't think there's any question but that the 4 best teams made it to the Final Four. The intensity, the physicality, the speed, the size, all of those things were into play. And I think if you looked at it objectively, and if you even asked some Notre Dame folks, it looked like Penn State might have even been better than Notre Dame in terms of those things. Where wasn't Penn State better? At producing in the clutch when the game was on the line. So right there, a lot to be proud of, but not quite where you need to be.
There's a couple plays during that game when you're watching it. They look like long-term rivals. I mean, the one play when Abdul goes down and the offensive tackle throws him to the ground and the guard jumps on, specifically that left shoulder that was hurting him. If this is last year where they're not playing for anything, Abdul Carter's not playing in that game.
Right.
Rightfully so, not playing in that game. The fact that he went out there and played that game gives you the measure and how important these games are to these guys and the university and the NCAA in general.
Yeah, and last year you saw in the Peach Bowl a lot of guys kind of bailed on that game, and I agree with you. Carter left his heart on the field. They all did. Notre Dame, I mean, I got to give them a lot of credit. I mean, this was a great game. You're tied at 10, 17, 24, and Notre Dame just kept coming back.
So did we, though.
Right, but I think that we're covering Penn State, so to me, you let them up with a 10-0 lead, and then you have a touchdown lead with 7.5 minutes to go. And the lack of complementary football, I think, and situational football was the most frustrating. At minimum, they needed to get the game to overtime.
And I think it's just one of those things here for Penn State. It's just like they came up just a little short. I don't think they necessarily lost the game for themselves. I thought they played overall really solid game. I mean, Drew Aller, I think, could have been better. That decision-making, though, at the end has to be better, especially when you hear him say that his first two options weren't there, and then he throws it to his third option, who also wasn't open.
We've done so many of these shows that I'm agreeing with Neil. I mean, this is.
I gotta go.
I do
I'm
think.
outta here.
I do think that they lost the game themselves. I mean, I think worst case scenario, maybe they didn't lose the game themselves, but when you're up 7 with 8 minutes to go, all you need to do is not shoot yourself in the foot over and over and over again, and at the very worst, you're going to overtime. And you have a hit to the head. You have Singleton jumping or going in motion. I'm missing one of the other. Oh, the blown coverage by Cam Miller, and then the interception. Any one of those mistakes you can overcome. And any two of them, you're probably going to overtime. They had 4 of them, and they still were almost going to overtime, and that's what has to be frustrating.
On both sides of the ball, I was thinking, which side is more accountable? I've settled on, obviously, the quarterback let you down in a key situation, which he has too much experience to do that. But, I mean, the offense still put 24 points on the board. I thought Singleton played terrific, the line. But defensively, to me, you're up 10-0, and you let a backup quarterback go up the field and get that field goal, and then to come out in the second half and you're talking about the middle 8. Notre Dame dominated that to tie the game at 10, and then somehow you got to get that guy on the ground when it's 7 minutes to go, and your corner falls down. Your safety has got to get the guy on the ground.
Yeah, in 2 games, one Ohio State where the offense didn't come through and you needed the defense to step up, and Ohio State marched right down the field, ran out the clock. And in this game, Aller throws the interception. Okay, at the very least, defense step up. And that's not to take away. I mean, the defense, the turnovers, the sacks, all those things were fantastic. But when they need to make the play, they didn't do it. And then you flip it around, flip the narrative. What did Notre Dame do? When it needed the plays were made. So, yeah, there were interceptions, there were mistakes, but in that final 8 minutes, who made the plays that mattered? And you have to give Notre Dame all the credit in the world for doing it.
All right, well, we got to take a quick break right here. When we come back, we're going to discuss what the future looks like for Penn State and the narrative surrounding James Franklin in these big games.
You're watching Nittany Nation Overtime.
Welcome back into Nittany Nation Overtime. Ryan Risky, Mark Brennan, Neil Rudel, and former Nittany Lion Keith, Goon, Conlin. Guys, this is one of the few big games that I think you probably can't put on James Franklin. He's deserved his fair share of blame in the past, except this one, I think he coached a pretty good game, except unfortunately he now falls to 1-15 against the top 10.
Which is really brutal. I mean, Joe was only 14 of 33 against the top 5. So that's a very high bar. We've talked about this before, and they came out of the chute. Joe was only, I think, 2-12. Then he went 9-4 in the 80s, which was really incredible. And then from then on, it was kind of downhill. But James has to eventually get over this. They'll be going to Ohio State next year. I don't know where Oregon will be ranked when they come in. I don't blame James. Didn't go out and tell him, hey, throw it over the middle across your body. I'm sure he didn't tell him that, but did they tell him run something safer than the first 2 options?
Goon, what did you see on that interception? We were talking about it a little bit.
The problem I had is that he made the pressure himself. He bled to the left. There was nothing coming from his front side. He's looking at downfield. He sees nothing because we were pass blocking spectacularly. He bled to the left, and the 3 technique just fell off. The guard was, you can't see where the quarterback is. You have your imaginary, your little hole back there, and the quarterback's there, and the pocket's right there, and he just bled right into that pressure. And when he faded to the left, he took the hit here, he threw across his body, which is rule 1 in quarterbacking. You don't throw across your body. At that point in the game, throw the ball away. The issue I have is first down and 10. Boom, we ran 13 yards.
That's right.
Got a timeout, clock stop, let's go. Do it again, see where we're going to go with it. Let's not get what in that game made anybody think that, okay, our wide receivers are going to, let's press these guys. Let's get Drew out there throwing to these wide receivers. They did nothing during that, literally nothing during the game that said, okay, let's go run a 2-minute drill. Tyler Warren and the other tight ends were fantastic. Our running backs were fantastic. It came down to playmaking on the outside. The whole season pretty much did.
Yeah, on that play, at that point, Penn State had 3 targets to wide receivers in the game and no catches. And why Aller would, why he would decide to go in that direction. And now he said afterward that he was attempting to throw it at Amari Evans' feet. That makes 0 sense to me whatsoever. If you're going to do something, whip it 80 yards over his head. But at the end of the day, the Penn State wide receivers ended up with more tackles, 2, than they did catches, 0. Why would you even be looking at that point? And that's where, when we go back to the original question, Ryan, you could talk about James Franklin being 1-15, and I think that's a big picture thing where everything does ultimately land on the head coach. But I think in this particular game, it's very hard to say, oh my God, this was James Franklin at it again. I think this was just a case of players making mistakes and the quarterback who shouldn't have made that huge mistake. It's tough to be critical of college kids, but these guys are making money now, and Drew Aller has been around for a long time. And you got to put a lot of that at his feet late in that game.
I think it was different than the Ohio State, where you didn't get the ball to Warren down in Texas needed to get the ball to Warren also, by the way.
Yeah.
And the same with Oregon, where they kind of rushed up the field. Kotelnicki said they needed a chunk play. They kind of didn't. They had 2 minutes and timeouts against Oregon. So again, it's just the common denominator, as you say. It does fall to the head coach, and but I don't think in this case people walked away and should say, well, it's James.
No,
James is the problem.
As you said, guys were making, and Drew usually does a much better job at taking care of the ball.
It's a 50% passer the last 4 games, though. So
yeah, Drew did not play well. And again, Mark, the wide receivers, that just can't happen on that stage. 0 catches.
No, and if it does happen, you can't be looking to them when the game is on the line, and that's my point. So you had gone to that point with being very effective to your tight ends. You got to this point of the season, and with your running backs
doing the ball.
What they need to do. Right, and going back to what Goon said, you're running the ball. The worst case scenario there is what should have been the worst case scenario is you play it relatively safe, and you're going to overtime tied. The game was tied at that point. You're not trailing. Your offensive line is dominating the game. You want to go to overtime with that O-line.
Well, that was my problem in the first half, though, because they were out rushing them 140-15, and yet you didn't get it in down there. And then you threw a bad pass to Singleton. He didn't catch it, but you didn't get it done in the red zone again.
Well, and don't get me going on the goal line, because they run the ball right down into the goal line situation, and then they put Venga Ioane in motion. Why are you doing that? That hasn't worked since the Illinois game. That was so much fun in the Illinois game, and it's like, has it worked since then? Goon, did that work? Venga going in motion after that, it was spectacular against Illinois.
Yeah.
Did it work at all?
They tried it against pop pass to him.
What's
the end game to all of that? Running all of those motions and stuff like that. You run a trap, you run an option. That you're pretty much limited to that, because you're taking one of your playmakers out of the game and putting him in there. And okay, but if you're going to run the ball, do it.
And then another thing, you take the ball out of Nick Singleton's hands, who also had 3 touchdowns in the game. He had a great game.
He did. Special teams. Just to bring that up. You fair catch a ball at the 2. Yeah. What are you doing? You need a punter. There's some other, in a game like that, to be able to uncork a bigger punt, and I just feel that there's some areas that going into next year need fixed.
All right, well, we got to take another break, and when we come back, we are going to look at what the future could hold for Penn State.
You're watching Nittany Nation Overtime.
Welcome back into Nittany Nation Overtime. Ryan Risky, Mark Brennan, Neil Rudel, and former Nittany Lion Keith, Goon, Conlin. And guys, we did talk about the negatives from the game. However, overall, big picture, Penn State made it to the Final Four. There are a lot of positives that came out of this season, and you kind of feel like, they could be setting themselves up for more deep playoff runs.
Well, they got great experience. And Keith, I'm glad you're here because I think the offensive line was really a positive. And hey, Denai Dennis Sutton played a tremendous game. We touched on Carter. There were a lot of positives this year and in this game.
Sure. Keith, the importance of an offensive line to not just a season, but this. I mean, when you guys were great in '94, that was a couple years leading up to it, and you had the same core of guys. To have a bunch of these key guys coming back, how important is that for where these guys are going?
The hat goes off to Coach Troutline with the depth he is building at that position. I mean, you got Nolan Rucci coming in mid-season there and playing the way he did. I mean, that touchdown, when he reached the backside 3 technique, I don't know if you guys saw that, but that's not.
Just bury him.
That's not normal. That's not a normal college kid doing that. That's a superior player. And it all starts in the middle with Nick. Nick is such a good leader. Nick Dawkins is such a good leader, and those guys listen to him. He is the heart. Like, we had Bucky Greeley as our heart, and he kept us all grounded, got us up when we needed to be up, kept us down when we needed to come down a little bit. But the tackle play has been outstanding. The guard play is going to get better. But the depth that we've built at the offensive line position, and we have dominated it at times in those playoffs. There were times this year where we did get dominated, like an Ohio State game, but we never got. It always felt like, talking to the guys, was they always felt like they won another shot at Ohio State because they felt like they could beat them up. And that's what really hurts about losing to Notre Dame this past week. But the hat is off to all those guys up front. And then, you got Tyler Warren out there. I mean, there's a guy who's just like Kyle Brady, just setting the edge, just destroying people. And that room is full.
Right. And that's the good thing. Offensively, I mean, the one glaring issue is obviously wide receiver that they got to do. They've already done some things in the transfer portal. We'll see if they do anything else. But quarterback, they're in good shape. Running back, whatever these guys decide, there's so much depth there. Tight end, that's a loaded position. And then over on defense, their secondary is really good, was really good this year, outside of a couple breakdowns here and there. To hear that Zane Durant's coming back to kind of fuel that D-line, I think they could bolster things a little bit at linebacker. But overall, the talent level in this program, really good this year. The depth was great. Wide receiver, an area that they have to address. But the level of talent across the board was really good this year, and I think is set up for years to come.
Yeah, and you found a kicker. Barker was about 15 of 18, so that'll give you some stability coming back there. So, hey, when you're sitting here within a field goal of playing for the national championship, there's a lot of positives, and hopefully they can continue to climb and get over that hump.
But the reality is, if people aren't negative, and nobody's more negative about what happened in that game than the coaching staff and the players, right? Yep. If they're not, then they're not learning from their mistakes. But I do think we have to acknowledge that overall, tremendous season for Penn State with so many positives overall.
And I don't think there's many people that thought they would be getting to the Final Four. They made it to the Big Ten championship game. I think a lot of people wrote them off after that loss to Ohio State because you assumed they'd be playing Oregon. Penn State got there. As we said, a lot of great exposure, great experience, and we saw them go on a long playoff run.
Yeah, and that'll be something to learn from because they had a negotiable road this year, and I think that's what made it a little harder to swallow in the end because they didn't have to play Tennessee and Ohio State right away.
But the other thing, now a lot of the players in the program have been through this. And that's not only the guys who are already in the program, but the mid-year enrollees, being able to join them for the 2 bowl trips. They now have guys who have been to more bowls than Goon brought this up, than classes. They actually were to 2 bowls. I said it was more guys have been to more bowls before they even took a class than a lot of guys for their entire career. But they've been through this whole process, knowing what it takes to prepare week after week after week when you get into week 13, 14, 15, and 16, and there's something to be said for that.
And then that was also uncharted territory. Nobody had ever played this many games. Penn State played 16 games this year.
And the thing is, even though they lost, they were not ill-prepared. I mean, they were prepared for everyone. They were physically able to do what they needed to do. Face it, there were teams that we saw in the postseason who were not ready. And Penn State, to its credit, even though it dropped a tight game late, was ready and was prepared, and I think is going to be better for it moving forward.
We've been begging for it, like I said, since the 60s. I mean, we've been running this playoff system for how long? I mean, think about past couple years. We lose to Ohio State midseason. We're not in the playoffs. It's not going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. because the way that the season shook out and some upsets and this and that. We did get in the playoff, thank God. We would have gotten in the playoffs because we would have been 4 probably, right?
Right.
But, I mean, the way we ended, I mean, if people are talking like, oh, Coach Franklin needs to make the playoffs and this and that, the Final Four and all that, and we did that. And then we had a nice little taste of it. And the taste was very good, but it left a very bad taste in our mouths. And there's no one that has a worse taste in their mouth than the coaches and the players in this team. I mean, and it's just going to fuel these guys for next season.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very exciting season. It was a fun ride for all of us. Anyways, we have to take one final break, and when we come back, we crown our Nitwit of the Year.
You're watching Nittany Nation Overtime.
Well, there was no Nitwit of the Week last week because we all picked Penn State, except that. So now that means I am now a 2-time defending champ for Nitwit of the Year.
You are, with help from your friends, you don't even have your third crewmate in there. So
He didn't win any this year.
If it takes 3 of you to beat us, great.
You're so dominant, you guys have smaller footballs.
Uh-oh.
Hey, I want to run down, thank everybody, but our guest nitwits really helped make the show, been friends of the show, some of the great names of Penn State history, and we're proud of it. Joe Nastasi, Keith Conlin, Steve Smear, Mike Irwin, Bill Contz, Chuck Fusina, Tom Bradley, the great Tom Bradley, Massimo Manca, Shane McGregor, a couple new nitwits this year, Al Pola and Landon Tangwell. They did a good job. And our old reliables, Roger Corey, Spider Caldwell, and just a shout out to you, man. We've done 19 shows, 27 years, and this year definitely bled a little long, but it was a lot of fun. Appreciate your efforts in getting down here on Sundays.
Yeah, did we mention Mike Irwin? I want to make
We
sure.
did.
Okay, I want to make sure Mike's in there. And
Yeah.
I want to thank all the fans. I mean, we're out there on the road and people say hello. Hey, nice seeing you. Aren't you a nitwit? We actually take a lot of pride in that. So it's been a great run. Been fun doing this for all these years with you guys and look forward to a lot more.
Yeah, this is my second year doing the show. I've had a lot of fun doing it with you guys and being on this journey covering Penn State football. And as Mark said, we thank all of you for watching. You know, we have a lot of fun in doing this show. We also take a lot of pride in trying to do it right and giving you our non-biased coverage of Penn State football. So anyways, that's going to do it for this year. This is our last show. Thank you all again for watching.